Hello, you're listening to Career Conversations, a series that's part of the Food Matters Live podcast. I'm Alicia Roche, a chef and food journalist, and together we'll meet experts in cooking, mixology, the environment, psychology, branding, social media, and all sorts as we learn about the surprisingly varied roles that go way beyond the kitchen. My guest today is Helen Pattinson, who created her own dream job by co-founding delicious luxury chocolate brand Montezuma's. She tells me how, even though she had a really well-paid job as a lawyer, something didn't feel right. And it wasn't until she went off travelling around South America that she found her true calling, chocolate. Helen, I hear you. She admits she was very lucky to have saved up enough to fund her project, but it still came down to hard graft and all hands on deck to get things up and running. I'll be back at the end with some key info about starting up your own food business. But for now, settle in and enjoy the podcast. Now, Helen, it's really lovely to have you because I love Montezuma's chocolates, but where did that unusual name come from?
We loved all the historical connections that we found around chocolate. It's got such a brilliant history. And Montezuma was this Aztec emperor. In fact, he was the final Aztec emperor. And he was in what is now Mexico when the Spanish conquistadors sailed over. But they mistook Hernan Cortés, the sort of lead conquistador, and they mistook him for a god returning from the east and greeted him with goblets of chocolate. And that was the first time, reputedly, that any European had tried cocoa or chocolate. And then obviously the Aztecs very quickly realised that Spanish were there to, ransack their land and take everything that they could. So the poor Emperor Montezuma, who'd greeted them with goblets of chocolate, was actually stoned to death by his own people. And we just thought it was this brilliant piece of history that actually gets overlooked all the time, because they've had cocoa in South America and Central America for thousands of years, and it's just been such a big part of their history.
Keep saying we were charmed by this story and we loved this story. Who's we?
Who is the we? Yes. So the we is very much my husband, Simon, who I set the business up with 22 years ago now. And I'm glad to say that our marriage has survived.
Fantastic. It must be all that chocolate.
Yeah, exactly. So Simon and I met as lawyers working in the city. In fact, he joined, although he's a little bit older than me, I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying that, he actually joined the law firm after me as a trainee. And because I was kind of a year ahead on my career path, I was assigned this young chap. I had to be his mentor. Right. And I took that role very seriously, obviously. I taught him everything I knew. And within weeks, we were engaged to be married.
Oh, how lovely.
I know. I mean, a bit impulsive. And my dad was horrified, but it was obviously a match made in heaven.
Well, they say when you know, you know. I've yet to know yet, but people tell me this.
Yeah, well, there you go. When you know, you know. But very quickly, maybe after 3 or 4 years of working as lawyers in the same law firm, we both gave up our jobs, decided that we just didn't like what the future looked to be. So egged on by each other, we sold a house and we put everything into storage except our rucksacks and our tent. I mean, it was a very cliched year out to go and find ourselves effectively, but we'd sort of promised ourselves that we wouldn't come back and be lawyers again.
Wow. So you went proper travelling with the rucksacks and everything?
We did. Yeah, absolutely. Off we went to Buenos Aires.
But I'm fascinated with the law stuff. It takes a long time to become a lawyer and lots of study and you have to pass the bar and everything. Do you think it's just that you were kind of both following a path you had been expected to follow and you hadn't really listened to your passions, or was it something else?
Yes, I do think it was partly that, but also partly that I didn't really know what my passion was, I think, at the time. I've got teenagers now and I watch them kind of jumping on this conveyor belt of studying and academic progress. It's nice to be able to remind them sometimes that actually you don't have to do what everybody else does. Really, really think about what you love in life.
Now let's go back to South America. So you're there with your husband, you're starting off in Buenos Aires. When did the seed or the cocoa pod seed get planted?
The first time chocolate really kind of was on my radar, or our radar, was when we went to a beautiful little town in the Argentinian Lake District called Bariloche. we found a whole host of chocolate shops.
Mm.
And Simon, unfortunately, was a bit unwell. Well, he recovered and stayed near the bathroom. I didn't want to go too far on my own. So I wandered around this town for about 3 or 4 days, just sampling the local chocolate delights.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I kept coming back to him saying, you've got to come and see these shops. It's incredible. And that some of them were little tiny traditional chocolate shops as we would picture them. But then there was also kind of a big chocolate supermarket where they were making chocolate in the middle, loads of kind of retail theatre going on. Chocolate is quite cool for that kind of retail theatre because the smell and the look of it.
And was there a moment where you tasted some of this delicious chocolate and thought, like a eureka moment, I could turn this into business?
It wasn't so much the eating it, although that was good. It was more a sense of if they can sustain all these chocolate shops in this little town in the middle of Argentina, what have we got back in the UK? And at the time, we had Thornton's.
I used to be the manager of Thornton's in Edinburgh's shopping centre.
Wow, that's incredible.
That's how I paid my way through uni.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Thornton's had done an amazing job at making better quality chocolate, more mass market, if you like. But even by that time in the year 2000, their packaging was very brown, wasn't it? Very traditional. So we really thought there's got to be an opportunity in the UK for something that is much more fun, really, really takes inspiration from the origins of cocoa, quirky packaging, quirky flavors, and all this. And, at this point, it was just ideas bubbling over.
At the time, I'd have been thinking, well, there's Thornton's and there's Cadbury's, and all the big brands. And then there's you launching this whole new thing. Isn't it a bit daunting?
Well, you would think so, wouldn't you? No, it was. We were so naive when we came back, and we just felt we did write a business plan, and it was all about a chain of chocolate shops, basically, which were fun and quirky and design led. But I still think that if you're not naive when you start a business, you probably would never do it.
Yeah, you have to be fearless, don't you?
Yeah. And we, at that time we had nothing to lose effectively. As my dad kept saying, you can always go back to being a lawyer. And I'm sure he expected me to for many, many years. And we did always have that to fall back on. But we were consumed, no pun intended, but consumed by everything about chocolate. Even how it grows is really, really complex, but fascinating. So the background to the history of it, the botany of it, it's all incredible. And we really just wanted to find a way to work with a product that we'd fallen in love with.
So you go back to your husband, he's not feeling very well in the room. You start telling him all about these delicious chocolates you're tasting and all the little industry that's going on. At what point do you start putting together your business plan?
I mean, we were trying to think of a business idea. We'd kind of made this commitment to ourselves that we wouldn't go back and be lawyers. We wanted to have our own business, but had no idea what that would be in. We continued to be inspired by chocolate, I suppose, and cocoa, particularly when we were in South America. So by the time we came back to the UK, it was the only business idea we really wanted to pursue. None of the others, we'd got particularly excited about.
And did you have anyone else who was in the food and drinks business that you could turn to as a mentor or for advice?
Not at all, no. So we set about writing a business plan, and that really just because there were two of us, one of us would write it and then the other one would read it and change bits, and we'd sort of talk about it and go, actually, we don't want to do it like that. We want to do it like this. We want it to look like that. We want it to feel like that. And it was really just a process of discussion and planning. And I mean, it felt like it was taking a long time. I think in hindsight, when I look back, I think, oh, actually, that was actually very rash. It was probably 6 months before we'd signed the lease for our first shop.
And where was that?
In Brighton. Finally, we found a landlord who was, who would take a chance on us and agreed to let his small shop to us. And then we had to set about creating a range of products to go in it.
So were you bringing chocolate from South America to here? Where's your chocolate made? What makes your brand different?
The whole business plan was a retail plan. So we wanted chocolate shops, but we didn't want to make it. because we felt that there were probably loads of people around the country who could already make it for us. So that was a big part of our research. We were visiting chocolate makers around the UK. We wanted it all to be made in the UK.
Gosh, that was a hard job, Helen, travelling around the UK, tasting all this chocolate.
No, we wanted everything to be under the brand in our packaging. So that was really important, and using our recipes. Yeah, so we found lots of very small chocolate makers who were going to make some of our products. And then we had one producer who would make about half of our range. And it was only after we signed the lease for our Brighton shop that we phoned around all the chocolate makers and said, right, we're ready to go. And we couldn't get in touch with the largest producer. So eventually we drove, they were based in Kent. So we drove where we'd met them and been round their factory before, only to discover a notice of insolvency on their front door.
Oh, no. Terrible.
Yes. In the meantime, it'd taken us a few months, obviously, to find our first shop. And in that time, this poor business had gone under. Nobody had told us, and we hadn't realised. Pretty disastrous. So we had this lease to our names, a product range in our minds, and no way of making it.
And what was the timescale before you opened the shop?
Once you sign the lease to the shop, you're paying rent and you need to get it open as quickly as possible, really. So the shop fitters were going in, and we needed to have some products to sell. So within the next 24 hours, we decided that we were going to become chocolate producers as well, which was an incredibly rash decision, but with the benefit of hindsight, has been the making of the business. It was the best thing that we ever did. And that was before we'd even really got going.
Isn't that amazing that sometimes you think it's actually a bad thing, but if you look at the silver lining, it ends up being the best thing that ever happened?
Yeah, it just gave us all the control we needed for the production to grow as we grew, but also to have control over the creative process.
Yes.
Which is so important to us, coming up with new flavour combinations and using new ingredients and stuff like that. And that is so hard to do if you're not making it yourselves.
That creative side, is that entirely you and your husband? I imagine there's teams and people helping you now, but were you coming up with your own recipes and flavours?
Yeah, we were at the time. Yeah, so for many years, it was just us kind of coming up with ideas. I mean, we get loads of ideas given to us by customers and staff. We just gather all that information, and it just helps to drive that process along. But, without our own factory, that would be really hard.
What was it like when this shop first opened in Brighton? I guess you finally did find someone to make you some chocolates.
We did, although we actually took on a little tiny production unit. It was a converted stable, actually. It was very, very biblical. And we bought a chocolate machine and a fridge, and we actually taught ourselves to make chocolate within a few weeks, which was challenging.
How? It's very difficult to make chocolate.
So when we bought the chocolate machine, we made good friends, still friends to this day, with the guy who sold us the machine. And then a lot of our ingredients we sourced through a brilliant company who, again, we still source through today. Actually, the account manager, in a previous life, he had been a chocolatier.
No way.
He came to teach us basically how to make chocolate.
Amazing.
Yeah, and that was a really fortuitous kind of connection, which just enabled us to get to grips with the basics. And then, once you've got the basics of making chocolate, you can, the flavour combinations that's the fun bit.
Was there ever an early breakthrough moment where you thought, I think we're really onto something here, we're on the right track?
So the first day we opened our shop in Brighton, I couldn't be on the shop floor. So I went upstairs, and our little shop in Brighton had a first floor where you could watch the street. And I went up there for the first half an hour and just looked out, just because I couldn't bear the idea that nobody would come in. And we opened the doors and people came in, and it was the most incredible moment when, somebody first paid money for something that we'd created. Genuine money that for a product they felt was, real and actually they were going to enjoy, which is such a big moment in a business. And it was after that first Saturday, I think we only took about £600, but to us, that was like gold dust. It was incredible that customers would do that. That was the start of the journey.
What a lovely feeling. And so as things started to take off and get better and better, when did you know it was the right time to start hiring staff or even bring in things like PR help?
Yeah, I mean, we brought on staff in the shop straight away. So Simon and I were in the store every day, probably for the first 6 months. One or other of us would be in the shop, but then we were also making the chocolate. So we were almost making the chocolate by night and going to the shop by day.
Oh, wow, you were knackered.
Yeah, it was pretty knackering that first year. So very gradually we brought on, a part-timer in the to make the chocolate, and then more part-timers in the store to help out in the shop. But it was definitely very on a shoestring. I always used to say there's nobody in the business who doesn't either make or sell chocolate. Obviously, that's not the case today. We have quite a lot of support staff now as well. But, it was really important to us that everybody had this real kind of purpose in the business that, really drove the business forward. And then it was down to me or Simon really to talk about the business. I used to spend hours and hours trying to talk to the press or sending them samples. We got a phone call very early on I think we were probably only 18 months old, and we had a phone call from Rick Stein's researcher.
Oh, hello.
Rick Stein loves your chocolate and he wants to put you in his new book. We just thought somebody's pulling our leg. It's a joke. So we almost didn't take it seriously. And sure enough, we became one of Rick Stein's food superheroes within a couple of years of starting the business, which was so cool to us. It was just because it was completely unsolicited as well, we wouldn't have even known how to get that kind of publicity.
That's amazing. Now, for any young people who are listening and they want to start their own business, but they're a bit worried, maybe it's because they're not sure where to start or it's a lack of funds, what great piece of advice can you give them?
It's so hard, isn't it? I really, really believe life is too short to not do stuff. So if you're really passionate and you have a brilliant idea, you've got to give it a shot. And I know that's so glib and so easy for me to say, but until you really, really try and put it into practice, you just will never know. So that's the first thing. Just do it. You've got to just get on with it. And don't procrastinate. I've met so many people who say to me, oh, I'd love to have my own business, but now's not the right time, or I can't afford to leave my job. Well, don't leave your job. Try and set up the business, try and do the basics while you're still working. If you're really passionate about that business idea, you'll find the time and you'll find a way. And, sometimes that does mean that you won't be able to see your friends or your family for months on end, but that is part of running a business.
You're absolutely right. You're talking to the chief procrastinator here. I must have told my friends a million times about different various Dragon's Den ideas I've had that I've never actually achieved.
I totally guess it's really hard. And I feel very privileged that we were able to set up our own business. We've both of us pretty much sailed into becoming lawyers, which meant that we immediately had a bit of an income and we were able to save up and go traveling. Not everybody can do that. But if you've got a business idea, you've got to find a way to make it work. And if that means borrowing, begging, don't steal, obviously, but try and find somebody who's going to back you.
It's me again. So that was Helen, who met the love of her life. Then they both quit their jobs, went off travelling and founded a business together. I'd say she doesn't do things by halves. And this brings me back to a message I hear time and time again from founders on the Career Conversations podcast. Be audacious. Go for it. The cost of setting up a food or drinks business will vary, but as a general rule, I'm finding out that small businesses should aim to raise at least 10k. Now, I know that sounds an awful lot when you're starting out with nothing, but there are specialist small business loans that can help and have low interest rates, such as Virgin's Startup. Or you could always go the crowdfunding route with Seeders, Crowdcube or Kickstarter, which has a food and craft category, especially for kitchen table businesses. Getting used to handling money and bills is just as important as your creativity and hard work. If you can't do it yourself, find a trusted friend or contact to be your money person from the start. And definitely join a Facebook group called The Food Hub that is especially aimed at startups and the food and drinks industry. Thank you so much to Helen for your time. And thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.